fall asleep, don't take it personally, is what I just heard.
I was like really into it, and I just broke.
What, the Ansible one?
Yeah.
Because it was pretty colors.
Oh, Aaron.
Yeah, pretty colors. Get Raspberry Pi. You're not allowed to take pictures of them because they're scared.
Well, only if you have flash. I couldn't take flash photos.
What?
Raspberry Pis, the newest version, they have hardware bug that when you take a picture of them with flash, they read. So they're
It's kind of amazing.
yeah, they're scared. They're shy.
Maybe they subscribed that anytime your picture is taken, that it takes a piece of your soul.
Maybe, yeah. No, the interesting thing is now they sort of secure the data centers because there are data centers built in Raspberry Pis. So they have to close the windows because now you could from outside you could flash the data center and all the servers. Inside, so
That could be a
it's a low
problem.
window data center.
Yeah. By the servers. The offices do. It's like usually the offices.
So we have like one or two or so.
Like ours has it, AOL's didn't, Facebook's didn't.
Probably depends where you live.
Probably. It also depends how you're.
Because ours are usually not, like the ones in Zurich, it's not, the building was not built as a data center. It's like a room,
Right.
and windows, and now there's this.
Yeah, they're using the blackout paint on those windows. Nothing to see here, folks. Alright. I have 4:30. Yep. Okay, Captain Impatient. Wow. Hey guys. Thank you for sticking it out for the last session. I know it's been a long couple of days and your brains are probably full. So I will try to go easy on you. If you have any questions, feel free to either interrupt me or there will also be time at the end for any questions as well. So welcome to Exposing Project Management's Scary Language, the truth about starting a project. A little bit about me. My name is Jessica Rothfuss. I'm a technical project manager at BlackMesh. I'm pretty new to the Drupal community. I started at BlackMesh about a year ago, and that's been my first introduction to Drupal. Before that, I was at various other large corporations, mostly in their infrastructure, and I did a little bit in dev. So today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about what is a project, so you know whether or not you're dealing with a project before you try to project manage said project. It's good to know exactly what you're dealing with. We're going to talk a little bit about scope, task identification, your dependencies, scheduling, your stakeholders, keeping expectations in line, and then some of the tools that are available. So before I go into what is a project, how many of you are actually project managers for a living? You are not a project manager. To Aaron. How many are developers that have been doing a little bit in project management? Michael, you can't raise your hand for all of them. I hate to tell you this. So basically, what is a project? There's something that's going to be temporary in nature. So it's going to have a very defined start and end date. It's not going to be something that you do on repeat all the time, like a system upgrade or anything like that. It's got that first beginning and end date. So you're excluding all of those ongoing operations, like a manufacturing process. It also creates something that's unique. So it's a unique product or service that comes out of your project. So this starts to exclude all of these things. So if it's not a project, what am I dealing with? You can be dealing with what's a task. That's something that's repeatable. It has no start and end date. It's something you do all the time. And 9 times out of 10, that's what you're mistaking for a project. In some cases, you may be thinking it's a program, and those are basically a set of projects that when managed together, they can get more benefits than if they were not managed and controlled together. So let's take a look at some of these. Is building a bridge considered a project? Knowing that definition. Have a thumbs up? Yes. What about software upgrades? No. Processing insurance claims? No. All right. Creating a new website is also a project, and writing a book, definitely a project. So let's talk about scope. I don't know how many of you have seen the comic of the trees and the swings. It's a common development comic that goes around. So you've got how the customer explained it, and it's the three-tiered swing. And then as you go through the different departments, everyone has their own interpretation. So the sales executive has described this as a lazy boy hanging from a tree. The customer was billed for a roller coaster, and what they really needed was a tire swing. So this is why scope is very, very important. So scope is the work that needs to be accomplished to deliver a product, service, or result with the specified features and functions. So that's what you consider your project scope when you're going in there and looking at it. It's going to be your first step towards your timeline. So you need to know what you're building before you can figure out how you're going to build it. It also helps you set your project goals as well as your resource allocation. So this is where you start figuring out who you need involved in your project, who's going to help you accomplish all of your goals. Okay, so where does it come from? I mean, I know I need it. Where do I get my scope from? And that's basically going to be your requirements. You're going to be narrowing down and getting very specific with your requirements. You're going to figure out what it is I'm building. Am I building the lazy boy, the roller coaster, the tire swing, something in the middle? This is where I'm going to start trying to figure out exactly what my customer is looking for so I can make sure that I build it correctly. I'm also going to use my project objectives. Usually those will precede your requirements, and I can get my information there. And then finally, I should be getting my deliverables as well. So what's the output supposed to look like with this? All right, I know what I'm building. Scope creep. I'm sure we've all heard this before in our projects. It is something that happens, as the comic here happens. I'm sure we've all been this person at the grocery store where we're like, okay, I'm just going to grab my basket. I've got my list of 5 things. I'm just going to go grab them. Oh, wait. I forgot I need some produce. I need some ground beef. Well, now I don't have enough room to hold everything, so now I've come to the shopping cart. I've had scope creep in my shopping. My grocery shopping, I've thought I needed the small basket. I actually need the cart. So basically how we define scope creep is it's the expansion of a project outside of our planned objectives. So this is what we planned for was the basket. What we need is the cart. So how to avoid it? Scope creep is going to happen. The first thing you're going to have to do is embrace that, but try to minimize the scope creep. And in order to do that, you need to start day one. So when you're planning your project, you've got everybody together, you're figuring things out. When you're planning, you need to make sure that you explicitly define those deliverables. Know exactly what you're delivering. Spell out what you're doing. Get consensus. Everyone goes, yes, this is what we're building. I like it. Make sure you're involving the right people at the right time, because everyone's had that stakeholder from over there that nobody knew about and said, but what about this? I was promised it would do this. You want to try and find them, because that will also minimize your scope creep. And then you need to understand your objectives. Make sure you're all using the same language. Make sure when you say it's going to do this, they understand exactly what that means and know that you've got everybody on the same page. All right, I've done all my steps to minimize the scope. Then I need to realize I need to figure out how I'm going to handle those changes when they do happen, because they're going to happen. I don't care how many hours you spend scoping things, you're going to have changes in your project, no matter what. So you need to have a plan, and you want to have that plan early, so you don't want to get that change and go, oh my God, I've got to change. I need to figure out what I'm going to do about that change. So at the beginning, when you've got everyone together, you're figuring out your scope, perfect time to start talking about how am I going to handle those changes when they come up. And the first thing is, okay, well, we're going to get a change request. How formal does it need to be? Do I need it in writing? Do I need it verbally? Can it come up in a meeting? Can it come through a task? Figure out the best way for your team to get that information. Then when a change comes in, determine the impact of that particular change. So, is it going to add a week? Is it going to add budget? Do you need more people? What are the impacts? What are the possible resolutions around those impacts? Can I add another person? Okay, that's going to increase my budget. Are you okay with that? No? Okay. Well, what if I drop this feature? These are all of your options. Pick one. Let me know. Let me know what works for you. All right, so I know what I'm building. I know how I'm going to handle my changes. I got to figure out how I'm going to build it. So this is where we start going into our task identification and figuring out exactly what I'm building. So there are a lot of different ways to do this. Depending on what method of development you're using will often determine how you map this out. So in Scrum, you're probably going to have your storylines and your user stories and all of that. In Waterfall, you're going to see something a little bit more like the flow-charted out piece of things. Your inputs are going to be similar, though. You're going to have scope. What am I trying to build? Can't figure out how to build it if I don't know what I'm building. I'm also going to take in lessons learned from previous projects. So have I done this before? Have I done something similar to this before? Because if I've done it before, it's not a project. But have I done something similar to this before? What mistakes did we make as an organization when we did this before? How can we not make those mistakes as an organization when we do it now? There's going to be organizational process that you're going to want to take into account. For example, you don't want to launch your website if it's not being monitored, because then when it goes down, you have no idea. Technically, can you do that? Absolutely. You can launch a website all you want without monitoring it. But you may have an organizational process that says, we don't do this. So you want to take those into account. And then the final piece is you need to determine how long each task is going to take. The normal standard, I guess, is going to be determined by what type of methodology you're going to be using. So if it's waterfall, it's usually like 8 to 40 hours per task. And then normally you'll just start determining your major deliverables. So you divide each one into a smaller component. All right, I've got phases. I've got design, I've got programming, I've got testing. And then I'm going to go through each phase, and then I'm going to keep breaking it down until I hit those, whatever minimum that happens to be that I have. So there are other ways to visualize this. This is just one of them. You can do outlines, you can do bubbles, you can do the Jira boards, the Agile boards in Jira. Doesn't really matter how you do it, as long as you actually know what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish before you start trying to develop. Another thing you need to start thinking about are your dependencies. And there are several types of dependencies. And you need to make sure that you know what these are so you don't put the cart before the horse when you're trying to develop. If I'm dependent on a piece and you ask me to develop it before that piece is done, we're going to have problems. So basically your dependencies are just a relationship between two activities. You've got your mandatory versus your discretionary. So your mandatory is the hard logic. Physical limitations. I cannot put walls up until I have a foundation. Just doesn't work that way. I can't make that happen as much as I want to. And then you've got discretionary, and this is basically based on that knowledge of best practices. So going back to our example of launching a website, again, we might want to put a dependency in there of get your monitoring in before you launch a website. Might want to do that. And then you've also got external versus internal. And the external is really, that's outside your project team's control. So if I'm waiting on a piece of code from another team that I don't influence, that's an external dependency. I can't influence that. I can talk to the project manager. I can tell them, hey, I need this from you. How can we work together? But I don't control that team. So it's an external dependency. And then my internal dependencies are really based on the relationships between the two activities, and that's within my control. So how do I identify all of these? Well, as I'm going through that list and I'm creating all those tasks, that's going to be the first time I really start thinking through those dependencies. I'm going to start brainstorming. I'm going to start categorizing. What needs to happen before I can start a new task? This time I really start thinking, and what type is it? Is it internal? Can I influence it? Is it external? Do I have to rely on, other people and kind of my persuasion skills of keeping things on time? So I need to start thinking about that. I also need to make sure I document them. So if I'm not around, because, I like to sleep, most project managers like to, you want to document it so people know okay, I can't start this until I have this. Or if you're not around, they can go, hey, where's that piece of code I need? And then as you're going through and creating your schedule, you want to confirm that, is this still a dependency? Do I still have this right? Yes? Did I forget anything? And then just keep looking. Things will pop up that get missed. So managing them. The first step to managing them, obviously, is identifying and documenting them. And then for your external ones, make sure you align them with the schedule. If you're waiting on somebody else, you need to go, okay, waiting on you. Hey, project manager for this other project. Let's talk about this. I need this. What are your dates? Do they align with my dates? If not, how can we help that? How can we negotiate maybe you pulling in your timeline or me pushing mine out a little? And then, of course, I'm going to keep an eye on those dependencies. And if I see them kind of going off that way, I might want to try and bring them back over to where they need to be so they hit those dates. All right, so we know what we're building. We know what tasks we need to accomplish to build it. The next thing we need to start thinking about is our scheduling. So when are we building things? We figured out what, we figured out when. We need to start figuring out our schedule. So the inputs that go into that are your scope, your dependencies, your tasks. This is also when you're going to start thinking about your resources. You need your resources identified to know who's doing the work before you can start scheduling it, because the person you need may not be available when you need them. So that's another thing you need to start thinking into consideration, taking into consideration. So the biggest thing to remember that bites so many people I see that are scheduling things out, there is a very big difference between effort and duration. So duration is the total number of work periods required to complete a task. Effort is the number of labor units required to complete a task. All right, what does that actually mean? So my effort, let's say I say, okay, this is going to take me 2 days. And you go, great, you are mine starting on Wednesday. So in 2 days, you're going to be done, right? Not really. So I only get your project 25% of the time. So now my 2 days has become 8 days. That's my 2 days is my effort. My 8 days is actually the duration of that task. And then everyone says, but you told me it only took 2 days. Why do you need 8 days? You're only allocated to that task for 25% of your time. So it's really important to keep that in mind when you're going through and trying to fit all your puzzle pieces together. That is the biggest thing I have seen bite people when they're putting their schedules together, and I've gotten bitten for it. When I was a brand new project manager, I'm like, wait, there was a difference? You told me 2 days. Why is it 8 days? So make sure you keep those in mind and know what your resource availability is. So you need to know, okay, I have you starting on this date, but how much of your time do I get starting on this date? You also want to keep reviewing your dependencies while you're putting your schedule together. Make sure everybody has everything they need before you ask them to start building it. What are your dependencies to do this? Okay, I have a new resource. I have a specific person for this. Person who is assigned to me. What do you need to do this? That's all going to go in there, and I'm going to review it against those. And then keep in mind, like with your scope, your schedule is going to change. So you need to keep that in mind. And again, you need to have your plan in place for when your schedule does change, because it will. Just accept it. Embrace that it will change. So when it does, you need to know who do you communicate your schedule changes to, and what is the impact of that schedule change. So it's very similar to how you handle your scope change. All right, I've got to change. What does it mean? How does it impact things? Who do I need to tell? What are our trade-offs? And how do I get consensus? So to do that, I need to know who my stakeholders are. Can't get consensus if I don't know who to ask. So stakeholder is a very broad definition. It's really anyone who can affect or be affected by your project. You're like, well, I'm designing a website. That's pretty much the whole world. I'm not can't involve the whole world. So we have different ways of classifying your stakeholders. And up here I have a list of different people who can be your stakeholders. You've got employees, your project team, shareholders, your customers, your interest groups, community, end users. All of them are your stakeholders, but not all stakeholders are created equally. So you've got to figure out who they are you've got to figure out how you're going to classify your stakeholders, really. So you have a couple ways to do it. I've seen it done different ways in different places. So it really depends on what works best for your project and your company. So one of the ways I've seen it is internal versus external. Is this an internal stakeholder? So this is someone who is within the business and working directly with the business. Got external, and these are groups outside the business, or people who aren't directly working within the business but are somehow affected by your project. I've seen it done that way. There's also direct versus indirect. This is anyone who is concerned with the day-to-day activities of the project, your project team, your developers, and then indirect would be anyone whose interests are either enhanced or threatened by this project, like your end users, your community. Those can all be your indirects. And then there's also the primary versus secondary folks. And your primary folks are really the beneficiaries. They're the targets of your effort. They're the reason you're doing your project. And then secondary is pretty much, they're involved with the beneficiaries, and they're kind of not, they're effective, but they're not really influencing. So for example, your customer would be a primary stakeholder, but your vendors would probably be your secondary stakeholders. All right, so I know who my stakeholders are. That's great. I need to start thinking about how do I engage them all? Because I can't engage everybody all the time. There are just not simply enough hours in the day, especially if you are launching a website and pretty much anybody in the world can be your end user. Okay, so got a quadrant here, and on the y-axis we've got influence, x-axis is interest. When we are identifying them, we want to start thinking about this. So when we identify, we are going to start thinking who they are. We're going to list them out. So our project team, influencers, customers, the public. And we're going to figure out, are we going to do secondary versus primary, direct versus indirect, internal versus external. Then we're going to start analyzing them all. So let's start in the top left, which is high influence and low interest. These are the people we want to meet their needs. We're going to engage them. We're going to consult them. We're going to try to get them a little more excited about our project, maybe help them see the benefits. We want to try to move them over to that right-hand side, which is high influence and high interest. These are my key players. These are the people I want to keep really happy and on my side. These are the people I'm going to first thing when there is a problem or good news. Either one, these are the folks I'm going to. And these are the ones I'm going to focus my efforts on. These are the ones I involve in those decision making. So when I come and go, hey, there's change. Guess what? Here are all our options. What would you like to do? You are my high influence and high interest person. I'm going to keep them engaged. I'm going to keep consulting them. I'm going to make sure they are as engaged in this project as I can make them. All right, so those are my high influence folks. Those are the people who are going to talk about my project. Those are the ones I want to really keep on my side, because if they're high influence and they're not happy with my project, I have a problem. I got to keep them on my side, or else with their influence, my project's going south. So let's look at the low influence and low interest people. These are kind of our least important stakeholders, as much as I hate to say least important. We're going to inform them via our general communications. We're going to keep them involved. If it's a new website, I might have a coming soon splash screen on there, and maybe a little bit of information if I so desire, if it's for public. Or if it's just for software that's being rolled out company-wide, maybe a general status email or newsletter in the company newsletter. I do want to try to move these folks to the right, but in some cases that's just not going to be possible. So for my high interest and low influence people, these are people who, they may not have high influence, but if they're interested in my project, I want to use that. I want to keep their interest, and I want to use that interest to my benefit. Because the more people I can say, more people who are seeing the project as a positive thing, the better off my life is going to be. Because we're humans, we're not good with change usually. Some of us are, but most of us are not. So we want to use anyone who's got that interest to our benefit. We want to keep them engaged. So for them, we're going to show them consideration. We're going to try and, hey, this is a really low risk thing. What do you think about this? We're not going to tell them that it's low risk, but we're just, hey, what do you think about this? Give me your opinion. I want to know. Can you help me make this decision? I'm going to keep them informed because I want to keep that interest level up. And I'm also going to consult them. It's like, hey, what do you think if we do this instead of this? I'm going to use them as that supporter and that positive influence. Because again, with change comes pushback. We need all the positive influences we can get. So how do I figure out who these people are? I don't want to do it by title alone. That's the biggest mistake I can actually make, is go, okay, well, this person's C-level, they're obviously a key player, and this person is, they're kind of down on the chain, so I'll just show them consideration. It's fine. There's politics involved. And as a project manager, you need to be aware of your politics around you. Not saying participate in them. You don't want to participate in them if you don't have to. You need to be aware of them, though, because you know who can help you get things done that way. You know who's listened to. You know who's not. And to find that out, you can talk to your internal team, especially if you're new to dealing with this person or with this group. It's like, hey, who do you guys go to for advice? Just tell me, talk to me. Who's listened to in the meetings? That's a very big key. Is sometimes there's that voice that comes out of the meeting and everyone listens to it, and whatever they say, everyone goes, yes. That person, don't discount them. They're probably going to be in that key player or meet their needs category. They're going to be high influence because everybody's listening to them. So keep observing people. And then who's your champion? Who is the most enthusiastic person about your project? Use that person. Just let them talk to people. Let them be happy. Who's your naysayer? Why are they so against it? Try and figure out what's going on there and how you can address it. Are they afraid it's going to make their life harder? So when I was doing software training and rollouts as a project manager, I was in law firms. Not good with change in general. Law firms, not good with change. So we had a lot of those naysayers, and they were always worried that the software was going to replace them. That was the biggest roadblock we'd hit, is they'd stop responding, they'd stop being helpful because I'm not going to help you, this is going to replace me, so I don't care. So you have to figure out what that root cause is and go, okay, well, no, it's not going to replace you. We still need someone who can put legal documentation together. While this software fills in some blanks for you, it can't pick the right thing to file. It's not going to replace you. It's here to make your job easier, and let me show you how. And you can take those naysayers and kind of show them it's not as scary as it seems. You're right. And move them over as being, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you can move your naysayer into your positive influencer. Okay, so I know who everybody is. I know who I need to pay attention to. There's the whole stakeholder management thing. And this is the main theme on this. I was like, this pictures it perfectly. Communication. That is going to be most of your job as a project manager, getting people to talk to each other. For stakeholders, it's particularly important. You need your stakeholders to understand that you understand their needs. You know what they're looking for. You're here to support them. You're here to help make them look good. This is especially important for your key players, especially if there's a lot of money on the line. You need to make them look good, and you need to make sure they trust you. So when you have those conversations, they're like, oh, yes, this makes perfect sense. You also need to understand what the preferred method of communication for those stakeholders would be. Is it, I want an email, I want everything in email, don't call me, don't text me, don't IM me. If it's not in an email, I don't want it. You're going to have the opposite too, of never email me, always call me, or text me, or IM me. In those cases, follow it up with an email anyway, just so everyone has that paper trail of what was discussed, what did we agree on, what are we thinking, is everybody on the same page? And then the biggest thing is keep their expectations in check. Know what they're expecting out of your project. Understand what they're expecting out of your project. And if it's a little off, maybe time to start bringing it back over to where it belongs. And that brings me to the bigger part of setting expectations. We've all had the stakeholder that's having a meltdown. I don't care. I want it now. Give me what you promised me right now. And it doesn't always happen with the key players. It can happen within your project team. This is a big place where I see a lot of meltdowns, is expectation mismatch. And the biggest way to get ahead of this is to get involved early. Make sure the right people are involved in your planning process. Make sure everybody's understanding the same thing. Involve your stakeholders. Involve all the ones that you need to. Make sure you have that clear scope. Make sure you have the sign-off. Make sure you know what your priorities are. Sometimes we run out of time in a project. If we spend all our time on a feature, everyone's like, that's fine if it doesn't make it in. And none of the stuff that if this doesn't make it in, we have problems. You've got a mismatch and expectations are going to be not so good. Acknowledge changes and impact. So this goes back to that change management plan that we were talking about. Say, yep, we've got to change. Here are options. What are we doing? So make sure you know those. Make sure you get that consensus from the right people. Know who those right people are. Know who your decision makers are. Be realistic. I know this is usually one of our bigger challenges as project managers. We're often given the end date and said, okay, just meet that. I don't care how, just meet it. So you need to be realistic in those. Okay, you want me to meet this date. Are you giving me more money? Or are we cutting down features? I can't do all three. I can't be constrained by all three items. Be clear with roles and responsibilities. Know who to go to for what. Let your project team know that you're there to be kind of that central hub and the traffic cop of things. You're also there to keep things on schedule, but you're also there to help unblock things. So make sure everybody knows who's responsible for what piece. Hold regular meetings. Let people know where things stand. Let people know the status. Who's blocked? How can we unblock you? What do you need help with? Is anybody behind? Is anybody ahead of schedule? Know what's going on. Have an escalation strategy. Have this before you need it. Don't wait till you need your escalation strategy to come up with an escalation strategy. Know exactly who to go to for what. So if you have someone falling behind on your project, know who to go to. If you have a customer blocker and you need to go above your normal contact, know who that is. Have that strategy in place. Hope you never need it, but have it in place before you need it. So if you do, you know exactly what to do and everyone's not running around with their hair on fire. Try to figure out pain points and risks. And I could spend probably a good half hour on risk. Unfortunately, I don't have a good half hour to talk about risk. There will be a blog post up on the JessicaBMesh blog in about a week about risk. I'm going to touch on it a little bit here. Risk is a little bit of a tricky thing because you're trying to anticipate everything that could either go wrong or that could enhance your project ahead of time. So there are some things you're going to know, right? Especially if, say, you're waiting on a large hardware order, it's tsunami season. You've got to accept the fact that manufacturing may get stalled if where it's being manufactured gets hit by a tsunami. I've had that happen several times in my career, unfortunately. You've got to start thinking about those and, okay, well, what's going to happen? What am I going to do if that happens? Obviously, I cannot control Mother Nature. I'd love to, but I can't. So what are my alternatives and how are we going to respond? These are the things I need to start thinking about. So when they do happen, or if they happen, I already know what I'm going to do, and I've set that expectation of, it's getting to be that time of year. I just want to make sure you know that if this happens, we're delayed, and these are our alternatives, if we have any alternatives. So make sure you come up with those alternative plans where you can. Make sure what that means if you need to kick that alternative plan in. Does it mean more time? Does it mean more money? Does it mean we've got to cut features? You need to make sure people know that we're not planning on this happening, but if it does, we have a plan. It's okay. And make sure they know what that plan is. And then the biggest thing, I can't stress this enough, I stressed this in the last one, is communicate. Communicate your good news. Communicate your bad news. Communicate your changes and your status. The more people know and the more people feel like they are connected to your project, the less tantrums you're going to have. And that's really, you want to keep everybody in check and everybody moving towards the same goal. So tools. I have just a handful of tools that have been used in different capacities. What you use may be different. If you've got a very small project with not a whole lot of people involved, you may just need Excel. That's probably not the case, but sometimes you can do it. There's also things like Microsoft Project and Project Libre, Omni Project are all that kind of put all the dependencies in and get your schedules shifted when things shift. Then there's the more collaborative ones like Active Collab, 5 p.m., Basecamp, and then a lot of the Agile development teams will use something like Jira and the Agile boards. All right, so please leave some feedback if you have any, or tweet me. I'm out of things. What questions do you guys have? Yes?
Can you talk about risk some more?
Can I talk about risk some more? That's a big topic. What part of risk do you want to know?
Well, you all deal with risk on projects from the start, right?
Yep.
So when you start identifying risk, how do you make that real to your clients, and how do you make it real to is it making deadline, the quality, the functionality, whatever it is that the risk?
So how do I identify risk and basically communicate it out effectively? Does that?
Yeah, and deal with it throughout the project.
So risk is a never-ending process. You're going to go through your first time and you're going to go, okay, well, this could be a problem. So for example, if I'm doing a huge migration and I can't get into the server, that's going to block me. I can't go any further if I can't get to your server to pull your data. I just can't. So that would be a risk that I flag. And basically what you're going to do is a risk registry. And you're going to list all your risks. And you're going to figure out how high of a risk it is. You're going to start looking at its likelihood versus its impact. So if I have a very high, it's pretty much going to happen, high likelihood, but low impact, I'm going to have a different response to it. If it's, okay, it might or might not happen, but if it happens, it's going to be a huge blocker on my project. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to start analyzing it. Usually identifying them as brainstorming throughout the project. Use your project team, ask people. If you're dealing with people who have been doing this a long time, they'll go, yep, that's a risk. You should probably write that down. So you want to keep track of all of those. And then you want to rank them of, okay, how bad is this going to be if it happens? Or on the flip side, because risk can be positive, how do I take advantage of this if it happens? This would be awesome. So I need to start figuring that out. So I'm figuring out my likelihood, figuring out my impact. That ranks them, right? If I've got high, medium, low, I can kind of do a matrix and figure that out. Then I need to start thinking about how am I going to respond to this? And that's where your stakeholders should really be involved of, okay guys, this is a distinct possibility. What do you want to do? Are you willing to spend the money? If it happens, here's the rough budget. Are you willing to add the time? Yes, no? And then keep on top of them. I usually, if it's a large project, I will review, depending on the number of risks. I've had projects that have over 100 risks. Depending on the project, I will at least review the highest every meeting. All right, or if we're meeting daily, it won't be every meeting, but probably weekly. Is it still a risk? Is it happening? Is its likelihood or impact, has that changed at all? And keep going through that with your stakeholders and keep them engaged and involved in those risks and make sure that they understand that if this happens, this is what it's going to do. Did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Mostly?
it sounds right.
Yes.
Can you, rather than just talking about when the risk actually happens, what are we going to do there? Can you change your schedule or so, your scheduling of the whole project to the risk of your tsunami order? let's say like, okay, because we know that this risk is there, we're gonna order earlier, that we cannot even run that risk, because if you just make a list of risks and everybody knows what happens if they really happen, I mean, like, it still will happen. You like try to fix.
Sure, that could be part of your response, right? So as you list them out, you need to figure out how you're going to respond to them. And if there are some that you can't deal with, if you have a way to avoid them, such as ordering earlier, depending on the timeline of your project, you may or may not be able to order earlier. But yeah, absolutely, you can take, one of the responses you can take is, we're going to avoid this risk completely. We're going to order from somewhere who manufactures where that isn't a risk. We're going to order earlier. We're going to find some hardware we can repurpose instead. So you can certainly swerve to avoid that risk if you needed to. Any other questions?
I have another one.
All right.
I'm thinking a lot about what you said of the high influence stakeholders, that you want to make them higher interest in your project. I understand that the higher interest it is, the easier it is if you need something from them. But don't you make it also really much harder yourself, because you now have to talk to them all the time, and like you have to like, and interest doesn't mean it's positive, it could also be negative. So
correct.
If you have somebody that is high influence and really interested, but he like asks the bad questions all the time, you don't want to move him more on the interest section, because he will be the guy that asks the questions.
That's correct. And you really need to start thinking about the influence piece of that too. So if they're very, very negative and they're high interest, but their influence is low, you're going to handle them differently than if they're high influence, high interest. So if they're high influence and high interest already, they're a key player of yours. You need to figure out how to get that negative turned around to a positive. Because they're one of your decision makers. They've got a high interest in this, which means something of theirs is on the line. Usually if you've got a super high interest in a project, there is something in your world that is being very impacted by what's being done. A lot of our worlds, it's going to be the person paying the bills. You want to make sure they're pretty happy. It's going to be the client, essentially. All of the client. And depending on who you're working with on that team, are they high influence or are they low influence? But they're probably going to be interested. So even though they are negative and they may start asking you a lot more questions, if they're negative, you do want them more engaged so you can help flip that negativity. Because they are, especially if they're high influence.
I just had a lot of projects where it actually was better to not tell the people early enough. Like if you have the people that pay, like if you tell them every time that you go, let's say 1% over budget, if you tell them all the time, they will start to not like your project. Rather, if you ignore it from the beginning and then maybe at one point you can declare, okay, we went 3% over. So it's like, I just seen a lot of projects, especially in the client service relationship. Internally projects.
Sure. So that goes back to the whole management, right? When do I engage them? How do I engage them? What do where is that level of engagement of 1% versus 3%? What's my buffer? What can I get away with? And that goes back to knowing my stakeholders and managing my stakeholders appropriately. So that's all very, very valid. It's just, you still don't want to write them off as a key player.
No.
Or write them off as someone who's high influence. It just goes back to that management piece.
So I got a follow-up question on that.
Yeah.
So you have a group of stakeholders, right? And some of them are high, and so they would score high on an NPS survey. So that they would be promoters, and then you may have a detractor, right? So in your approach to projects, do you try to deal with them as a whole, or do you actually focus on the detractors?
So the question is, do I put my focus on the people who are positive about my project versus negative? Is that?
You focus on the detractor. Like if you have 5 stakeholders, and you know a stakeholder that has a certain area of the project is a detractor, the other ones are very happy, right? They're the promoters. So
So if I have one stakeholder, I just want to make sure I'm answering if I have one stakeholder who's really just not feeling the project, do I kind of go around, process, leave the ones that are pro project alone and kind of go around to him or her and make them happy? Okay. It depends. I'm sure you love that answer. It really depends a lot on how big their influence is. I need to look at, can they kill my project, essentially, is one thing I need to know. I need to know the politics of the situation. Are they super political and will turn the other stakeholders against this project if I let them? Are they just kind of, yeah, they're important, they're kind of signing the check, but they're not important as these four over here? Depending on that answer, I may sit down with them and go, all right, what are your concerns about this project? I noticed that we're having a little bit of conflict here. How can I help? How can I make you feel more comfortable? And at this point, they might start talking about, well, it's changing my entire world and I don't like it. Okay, be a little more specific and just start digging down into why. So in some cases, yeah, I absolutely would start talking to them about it. And really, it's such a political dance sometimes, depending on the environment, that if it's politically unwise to have that conversation, I will use other resources at my disposal to see how I can get them kind of moved over to my side. Yes?
Do you have any tips on managing the misinterpretation or miscommunication that can happen pretty easily through written communication, like emails?
Sure. So the question is, do I have any tips on handling miscommunication, especially within email? And yes and no. Unfortunately, tone is something that bites all of us in email. I know we've all been there where we're like, ooh, that was harsh and I really didn't mean it that way. Really the best thing I can say is know the people you're communicating with. I mean, there are some people I can be pretty abrupt with in text and they know that's not how I'm coming across. And there are some clients where I will read that email 7 times before I send it and then call someone else in to read it and make sure it's like, did I go too far? Am I being abnormally mean? Am I being a little too blunt? And then really relationship building is going to be the biggest thing there. So if you know that you've got a stakeholder who's a little more sensitive or a little easily thrown off by that, build that relationship, get that trust going, and that way they're like, oh, no, she didn't mean it that way, she's fine. Face-to-face time, I know that's harder and harder in a distributed world with our clients all over the place, our teams all over the place, even just, Google Hangouts, Skype, if all else fails. There's something to be said about being able to get those cues, right? All those nonverbal cues when you're talking to someone. And as you're building that relationship, if you can get in front of them, do it. If you can't, there are other ways to build that relationship. Talk to them on the phone. It's even better. I mean, it's not great, but it's better than typing as they're starting to get to know you and know your communication style.
What are you doing if you know that you cannot figure out your stakeholders? Like we have a lot of projects where we just talk to the project manager on client side, but what is behind, if there is a board, a steering committee, whatever, so you don't know how is your client influenced, because you're interested in these stakeholders, but you don't work at the company, you can't, so what are you doing then? Do you just accept the fact?
So the question is, how do you handle it if you don't know who your stakeholders are? If there's maybe a project manager who's shielding essentially the rest of the company. And sometimes you have to accept it. There are times where you're just like, all right. What I usually like to do is build that relationship with the project manager and just be like, so who makes these decisions? Is there anything I can provide to you to help you be more successful while we solve this problem? Because if you take it as that, okay, I want to help you provide this information to help make your job and your life easier, they tend to open up a little more and they're like, okay, you're here to help me. You're here to make my life easier. I like that. I'm going to be more willing to share with how you can help me persuade the board or talk to this management team. And as you build that relationship, it really is interesting what comes out.
Let's say it doesn't work. Do you declare it somewhere that in case things are going to completely fail out, that you can go back and say, hey, look, I told you you should tell me who the stakeholders is, but you failed, so I'm taking me out of the responsibility?
A little bit softer than that, but absolutely. It would be more of a, just, maybe a phone call of, hey, to help me be a little more successful on this project, it would be great if you could provide me who are your decision makers, who are the main people here, and then of course follow that up with an email of, hey, we want to make this all successful, we all want to be here, we all want this to move forward. Here's our structure, what's yours? And this is the reason I need this. I can be more successful, I can give you the right information. And if I don't have this information, then I'm going to do the best I can, but we really need that open door communication of, I need to talk to your stakeholders, you need to talk to mine, so we do have the right people engaged. And if they block you off of that, it's unfortunate. It really is, because that is not going to be the best for your project. And that's kind of how I phrase it, is it would be best for our project if we have our stakeholders talking, actual interaction with our teams. So then we're not playing telephone. Any other question? Yes, Ruth?
How do you impart responsibility on the client in terms of the timeline?
How do I impart responsibility on the client in terms of the timelines? Good question. Basically, it goes back to my favorite slide here of SpongeBob with communication. You need to tell them in no uncertain terms. If I don't have X by Y date, we are blocked. We will not hit the date. We are day for day slip. You have,
Told them that you're blocked and they just kind of don't care. You're still blocked 3 weeks later.
sure. Happens to all of us. 3 weeks later, we're still blocked.
I still need this from you.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're the ones paying the bills, so it's a hard dance, right? It's a very delicate dance of, so I haven't heard from you in a while. I can't hit this date until you get me this, right?
That's what we do. Like, we add to each of the deadlines, we add the deadline, and also what happens if they don't provide us.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they just say, well, if I give it 2 days later to you, that's no problem. But suddenly your backend developer that now is on holidays and was blocked for these 2 days.
Yep. You've got to be.
We try to make it clear to the client what happens. And sometimes you overdo it a bit, of course.
They're terrified to miss a deadline now. Don't hurry.
Well, you can still come back and say, well,
Sure.
we figured a way out to, even though you were 2 days late. But
Yeah, help them understand the consequences of their actions.
They're not the only one.
Right, and that's the thing. It's like, I have this window. If I miss this window, and I've pulled this one before. If I don't get this by this date, my next available date is 6 weeks from now. Take your pick. And sometimes you have to force the hand that way. It's not my favorite way to do it.
I figured it all the time.
Michael's like, yes, this is my favorite way. But I make sure they understand it so they know it's coming. But if I start seeing them go non-responsive, my emails will start getting a little more urgent. Call them and be like, hey, so remember that deliverable that you had due to me? That was yesterday, and if I don't get it by, now, I'm going to have to bump you out 6 weeks. So sorry. But really, it goes back to the whole communication of, here's where I'm blocked, these are the consequences.
The other thing that we do is we have tools that remind the client. So we have
Oh,
Jira.
you have tools that auto-nag, huh?
So our clients are in Jira. So if they have a due date, our Jira sends them every day a mail.
Nice.
That ticket is not finished.
That's awesome.
So they cannot stop. Well, they can go and close the ticket.
Sure.
They don't do that because they know that everybody knows that they did something. So basically, an automated tool tells them every day. Yes, they can delete the days and so, but it's just like
That'll help the project.
Right.
Yes.
There's a lot of nagging going on.
But it's not. I mean, almost every tool can do that, and it's an interesting way to do it. But that's how I look at clients. They are really partners.
Right.
Not like clients, they're kings, and they can do whatever they want. So if you have such a tool, like leverage it, and suddenly they contact you.
Yeah, I'm not nagging you. The system's just telling you. I don't know what you're talking about, but that's genius that you guys have that. Most places, unfortunately, don't. So it is that constant of, hey, you're late, and sometimes you got to call them and go, what's up? Why are you ignoring me? Or are we not friends anymore? So you don't call, you don't write. So it's really just a matter of figuring out why. And also that's a great question. I've had a lot of clients where I'm like, hey, that thing that you owe me, I still need that. And they're like, yeah, so I've been ignoring that because I don't know what to do with it. So figure out why is the other part, and try to get ahead of that as well. Any more questions? No? You guys look fried. Thank you.